My name is Lan Whitaker. I'm 29 years old, and last Saturday, I was publicly humiliated at my cousin's wedding, not by mistake, but by design. I wasn't wearing designer clothes. I wasn't holding a flashy purse. And I certainly wasn't on their precious guest list. So, when I walked into the lobby of the Meridian Grand Hotel, the security guard didn't hesitate. He stepped in front of me, held out his arm, and said 6 words I'll never forget. "You're not on the VIP list." It didn't matter that I had the digital invite. It didn't matter that I had RSVP'd. It didn't even matter that I had watched my mother's ashes being lowered into the ground with half of those same relatives standing beside me, promising to look after me. I guess they forgot. The guard looked past me like I was invisible, but the woman who stepped in to speak for him, oh, she made sure everyone noticed. "That's Lan," she said, her voice rising above the chatter of the lobby. "She's just some distant niece or something, probably here to crash the party. We don't need charity guests today." The silence that followed was deafening. Conversations died. Champagne glasses paused mid-air. Eyes turned. And then came the laughter, low at first, then louder from the back. I should have left. I should have walked out and spared myself the shame. But I didn't. I looked the woman in the eyes, Aunt Teresa, my late mother's cousin, and said as calmly as I could, "I'm not here for attention. I just wanted to celebrate my cousin's day." She sneered. "Well, you've had your moment. Now please remove yourself. This is a high-profile event, and we have guests with real names here." So I did what they wanted. I stepped aside, walked toward the exit as my heels clicked against the polished marble floor, echoing with every ounce of rejection. But here's what they didn't know. 5 minutes later, that same hotel manager who ignored me when I first arrived, he was sprinting across the lobby, nearly tripping over his own clipboard. He stopped inches in front of me, breathless, his face pale. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, "please accept our sincerest apologies. There's been a huge misunderstanding. Would you allow me to escort you to the grand ballroom myself?" Now, before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been pushed aside, belittled, or treated like you didn't belong by your own family? Have you ever been underestimated, not because of your actions, but because of how you looked, where you came from, or what they assumed you were worth? If you know that feeling, hit that like button and comment the number 9 below. I promise you, this story is for you. Because what happened in the next hour inside that hotel changed everything. Not just for me, but for every person who thought they knew who I was. Let me take you back a little to before the invitations, before the whispers, before I ever walked through that hotel's glass doors. Because once you know what I've been through, you'll understand why I didn't fight back in the lobby. I didn't need to. I was already holding the trump card, and they were about to find out. When I was 13, my mother died of a sudden brain aneurysm. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because I had just come home from a science fair with a second-place ribbon clutched in my hand, excited to show her. Instead, I found a neighbor waiting to tell me she collapsed at work. Her funeral was a blur. I sat in the front row next to a woman who smelled like lavender and didn't speak to me once. Her name was Teresa, my mother's cousin. She arranged everything, signed the papers, and then patted my head like I was someone else's child. "We'll figure something out for her," she told the others. "I mean, she doesn't really have anyone, does she?" They talked like I wasn't there. I ended up in a foster home 2 towns over. No one from my family reached out. Not a birthday card, not a phone call, nothing. I learned early that I was not the kind of person people remembered, so I stopped expecting anything from anyone. I worked after-school cleaning offices. I used my weekends to study. I kept to myself, not because I liked being alone, but because I was tired of being forgotten. Rejection was easier when you stopped hoping. By the time I turned 18, I had 3 things to my name: a duffel bag, a bus pass, and a full scholarship to a state university. I majored in urban planning, not because it was flashy, but because I loved the idea of building something that lasted, something people had to notice. I graduated early, got into development consulting, and somewhere between a rejected proposal and a lucky lunch meeting, I pitched an idea to the right investor. That idea became a real estate startup. 3 years later, it became a $40 million acquisition. I never went viral. I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't post victory selfies on Instagram. I just built what I needed to, in silence. You see, when you've been invisible for most of your life, success feels less like fireworks and more like oxygen. But even after all that, I never got a single message from the people who shared my blood. Not until the wedding invite. It wasn't even addressed to me directly. It came through an old college friend who also happened to be dating one of my distant cousins. They're throwing a big wedding, she told me. Apparently, it's invite only, but your name wasn't on the list. I smiled when I heard that. Of course it wasn't. So I bought a simple dress, no label, no heels that screamed money, just me, as I'd always been. And I showed up, not for them, but for me. I wanted to see if anything had changed. It hadn't, not at first. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't the same girl they'd pushed aside at a funeral all those years ago. I had become something else, someone else, not out of revenge, not even out of ambition, but because being invisible teaches you one of the most powerful things in the world. You don't need their approval. You just need your own. So when the hotel manager came running that day, when his voice shook and his hands trembled as he tried to correct the mistake, I looked him in the eye and simply said, "I'm not angry. I understand. People see what they want to see." And that's exactly what my family had done. For years, they saw a burden, a stray, a placeholder for someone who no longer existed. What they never saw was me, but they were about to, because while they were sipping champagne and taking photos under chandeliers, an email had just gone out to the hotel staff. A memo from the new majority shareholder. Subject line, "Please prepare the ballroom for Ms. Lan Whitaker's arrival." Because I didn't just come to this wedding, I owned the building it was held in, and they were 5 minutes away from finding out. I had just taken a seat on the low stone ledge outside the hotel's entrance when I saw him, the hotel manager, sweating, frantic, moving fast, too fast for someone whose job usually demanded poise and polish. He was holding a tablet in one hand and speaking hurriedly into a headset as he scanned the front entrance. When his eyes landed on me, he froze mid-step. Then his entire body snapped into motion. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, out of breath but trying to maintain dignity, "please accept our deepest apologies. There's been a serious miscommunication." I looked up at him, legs crossed, calm. "Oh?" I said, eyebrows raised just slightly. The manager swallowed hard. "We just received a memo from corporate. They informed us you'd be arriving today. We weren't notified ahead of time, which is completely our fault. I assure you, The entire staff has been briefed. May I escort you personally to the grand ballroom?" For a moment, I said nothing, not because I wanted to make him sweat, but because I needed a second to process it, the weight of everything, the years I spent ignored, the way they dismissed me, not just at this wedding, but for most of my life. And now, suddenly, I was someone worth chasing down. "I think I'll walk," I replied, standing up and smoothing my dress. "But thank you." He stepped back and held the door open with both hands. As I entered, a new kind of silence filled the lobby. Hotel staff bowed slightly. Guests paused to stare. The woman at the concierge desk, who had ignored me earlier, now nodded respectfully, her face pale. But it wasn't until I reached the ballroom that the real shift happened. I didn't walk in through the side entrance like before. This time, the manager opened the main doors wide, announced my name, Ms. Lan Whitaker, and gestured with a deep nod for me to enter first. The music faded. Heads turned. Teresa, the same woman who'd humiliated me less than an hour ago, was standing by the welcome table. She blinked twice, her glass of champagne tilting slightly in her hand. "Lon?" she said, almost a whisper. I smiled softly and kept walking. Behind me, the manager leaned down to speak with the head caterer and pointed directly at me. Then I heard the caterer call out instructions. "Realign table 6. Remove the placeholder. Ms. Whitaker will be seated at the head table, next to the family." Someone gasped. I didn't look back. I walked straight through the ballroom, heels silent on the carpet now, as guests parted like water around me. Then I heard another voice. "Excuse me," said the wedding planner, jogging up beside me with a clipboard. "Ms. Whitaker, we weren't aware you were attending. We had no idea you were, well, important," I said, with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "It's okay. You weren't supposed to." She blushed. "We'll fix your name card immediately." "That won't be necessary," I said gently. "I won't be staying long." I paused just a few feet from the head table. The bride and groom, my cousin Michael and his new wife, were laughing with guests, oblivious. Then Teresa's voice cracked through the room. "What's going on? Why are they changing seating for her?" The hotel manager, now composed but firm, stepped in front of her. "Ms. Whitaker is our new majority stakeholder. She owns the controlling interest in Meridian Hotels." Silence, like thunder hitting the center of a church. All at once, the dynamics shifted. The same people who had pretended not to know me now scrambled to place me. The distant niece, the girl from the foster home. Wait, what? Teresa's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish desperate for air. I didn't know," she finally stammered. "No," I said, stepping toward her. "You never asked." I turned to the hotel manager. "Could we clear this space for a moment? I'd like to say something." He nodded and waved toward the DJ, who faded the music. The clinking of glasses stopped. Conversations died down. Even the children went quiet. I stepped forward and took the microphone off the stand. "I wasn't going to say anything today," I began. "I came here quietly, alone. I didn't need attention. I just wanted to support my cousin." I glanced at Teresa. "But sometimes the way people treat you says everything about how they see you, and nothing about who you really are." I scanned the room. For years I was forgotten, ignored, treated like a burden. But you should know something. The people you overlook often become the ones who own the room. I placed the mic back gently and turned to leave. But I wasn't done yet. They still didn't know about the letter and what I was going to do with this hotel next. I turned to leave the stage, but before I could take more than 2 steps, I heard footsteps approaching fast. "Lon, wait," Teresa called out, her voice shaky. I stopped, not because I owed her anything, but because part of me wanted to see what she would say now that the world she had carefully curated was cracking. She stepped up beside me, gripping her clutch like a lifeline. Her smile was artificial, stretched too wide, too fast. "Listen," she said, low enough so most guests couldn't hear. "I had no idea. If we'd known you were involved with the hotel, you would have treated me like a human being?" I finished for her calmly. "Is that all it takes?" Her face paled, but she kept the smile. "Come on, Lon. You're family. We've all just been under stress with the wedding. You know how these things go. Misunderstandings happen, but we're all just so proud of you now." Now, that word hit like a stone in the chest. Now that I was useful. Now that I had something to offer. "I'm not here for pride," I said quietly. "I came here because Michael was kind to me when we were kids. He used to share his crayons at family dinners. No one told him to. He just did. And that mattered." She nodded quickly, grasping at the lifeline. Yes, Michael's always had a good heart. I looked past her toward the head table. Michael was staring at me, confused, unsure of what was unfolding. His bride leaned in, whispering something, clearly unaware that this wedding was becoming about much more than floral arrangements and champagne. I took a breath and turned back to Teresa. "There's something else." Her smile faded. "What?" "I'm issuing a new policy at Meridian Hotels," I said. "One that takes effect immediately." She blinked. "What does that have to do with—" But I was already walking back to the mic. This time I didn't wait for silence. I took it. "To all guests," I said, voice steady, "as the new majority stakeholder of Meridian Hotels, I'd like to make a brief announcement." Everyone turned. Phones came out. Cameras clicked. Teresa stepped back, her lips pressed into a nervous line. "We will be instituting a new hospitality policy," I said, "one that prioritizes human dignity, not just financial status. From this day forward, any guest who is discriminated against based on appearance, assumed class, or perceived value will have grounds to file a grievance directly to my office." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Because no one," I continued, "should ever be made to feel small in a space that claims to serve people." I paused, then added, "And to demonstrate how serious we are, this hotel will be hosting monthly charity events for youth aging out of foster care, the same system I was pushed into after being ignored by the very people I shared blood with." Dead silence. Teresa's face was ghost white. The manager clapped first, then the rest of the staff, then the room. It wasn't thunderous at first. It was hesitant, confused. But then it grew. Even Michael stood and clapped, slowly at first, then with real warmth. That's when Teresa tried again. She approached the mic, a desperate smile pasted back on. "Let's all give a hand to Lan. I mean, Ms. Whitaker," she said, laughter forced into her voice. "What an inspiration to all of us." I stepped slightly to the side, but didn't move, and then I leaned over and said into the mic, softly but clearly, "You didn't even recognize me when I walked in. But now you want to praise me? That's not growth. That's damage control." The crowd was silent again. Teresa's hand dropped from the mic like it had burned her. She stepped back, swallowed hard, and disappeared into the crowd. I turned and walked off the stage. The air felt lighter. The heaviness I'd carried for years, being overlooked, minimized, dismissed, was lifting, because this moment wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. It was about walking into the same room where I had once been erased and making myself unmistakably visible. And that letter, it was in my purse, signed and sealed. The sale of the Meridian Grand Hotel was just the beginning. I had other plans they couldn't stop, because they had already written me off, and I had built everything while they weren't looking. The ballroom slowly returned to its rhythm, or at least it tried to. Music resumed. Conversations crept back in. But the tone had shifted. The room was no longer buzzing with wedding celebration. It was holding its breath, trying to make sense of what had just unfolded. I stepped off the stage and made my way to the back, where a small cocktail table sat by the wall. I needed a moment to breathe, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I could finally exhale. That letter in my purse had been burning a hole in my conscience all day. I hadn't known if I'd reveal it or not, but standing in front of those people, hearing their sudden praise after years of silence, made the decision simple. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about honesty. And so, when the hotel manager approached once more, visibly more relaxed but still slightly rattled, I nodded. "Please prepare the projection screen," I said. He blinked. "Of course. Any specific file?" I handed him a small USB. "Just follow the slides. I'll cue the last page myself." Minutes later, just as dessert was being served and whispers were buzzing at every table, the ballroom lights dimmed, and the hotel's logo appeared on the screen. "Ladies and gentlemen," the manager announced, "we've been asked to share a brief presentation on behalf of Ms. Whitaker. Please direct your attention to the screen." The first image appeared. It was a grainy photo, a little girl in a wrinkled dress sitting alone at a school cafeteria table, a paper lunch in front of her, no one beside her, me, age 8. Another photo followed, high school, graduation cap, slightly crooked. Standing alone again, this time next to a cardboard sign that read, "State Scholarship Winner." Then a news clipping, "Young developer sells urban project for $40 million. My face blurred behind the text. Then came the letter. Simple, unassuming, black text on white paper. It was addressed to me from the board of Meridian Hotels, congratulating me on becoming majority owner through acquisition of a 51% stake. Below that, a quote I had requested they include, "Some people inherit legacies, others build them in silence." A long pause followed, and then the final slide. It wasn't a photo. It was a scanned letter, handwritten, old, signed, Helen Whitaker, Mother. I had found it folded inside a book she left behind. I didn't remember it until a few years ago, when I was going through my things after the sale of my company. It read, "To Milan, if they ever try to tell you that you don't belong, prove it by building something they can't touch. And when they finally notice you, don't seek revenge. Seek peace. But never, ever let them forget who you are." When the lights came back on, the silence in the ballroom was different. Not shocked, not awkward, just quiet, humbled. And that was when Michael, the groom, stood up. He walked over, leaving his new wife's side, and stopped in front of me. "I didn't know," he said quietly, "but I should have reached out, and I'm sorry for how they treated you today. That was wrong." I nodded once. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "Would you stay for dinner? I'd like you at the family table." I considered it, not out of anger, but because I wanted to be sure. And then I smiled. I'll stay, but only if they bring back my original place card, I said. He laughed genuinely. Done. A few minutes later, the head caterer returned with a reprinted name card, the ink still fresh. Lan Whittaker, family. But this time, everyone at the table stood when I approached, even Teresa. She didn't speak, she didn't smile, but she moved aside and let me sit, not as a guest, not as a burden, but as someone who now occupied a space they had denied her for years. I sat down, placed my purse on my lap, and glanced at the screen one last time. The final quote lingered on the projector. You don't need to be accepted to have value. And in that moment, I finally believed it. 6 months later, I stood at the window of my downtown Chicago apartment, sipping coffee and watching the early snow settle on the rooftops. The air was quiet, peaceful. I'd come a long way from that ballroom, from the little girl who sat alone at the school lunch table, from the young woman no one invited, no one called, no one saw. Now, I chose who I let into my life. That included family, or at least the parts of it that mattered. There was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Michael, the same cousin who had once been a blur in a crowd, now holding a homemade dish, his coat dusted with snow. I brought sweet potatoes, he said, grinning. Or something that's supposed to taste like them. I laughed. That's brave. Come in. Behind him came his wife, Anna, holding a small bouquet of winter lilies. Thank you for having us. I still feel bad about how everything went down. You didn't know, I said, and you never treated me like I was invisible. They stepped inside. My apartment wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. Clean lines, soft light, a few framed photos of my mom and me on the bookshelf, and a new one, a group shot from Thanksgiving last month. Michael, Anna, a couple of close friends, and me. Teresa wasn't in that photo, but she had sent a letter, not an email, not a message, a real letter, apologizing. It wasn't perfect. It didn't undo what she said in that lobby. But it was honest, and sometimes honesty is more valuable than history. I hadn't replied yet. Some bridges you cross slowly when you're ready. Lon, Anna said as we set the table, that night at the hotel, I've never seen someone take control like that. You didn't yell. You didn't gloat. You just stood there, and everything shifted around you. I smiled softly. Because I've been invisible before. And when you've been invisible long enough, being seen is power. But choosing how you're seen, that's purpose. Dinner was simple, warm, full of laughter and stories. No backhanded compliments, no awkward silences. Just people who showed up because they wanted to. Not because they were obligated to. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the city had gone quiet again, I stood once more at the window, looking out at the lights below. I thought of my mother, of how she used to say, the world doesn't owe you recognition, but you owe yourself truth. She was right. I never needed the applause, or the front row seat, or the hotel to know my name. I just needed to stop chasing rooms that were never built for me and start creating my own. That was the real revenge. Not power, not status, but peace. Being able to walk into any space, ballroom or boardroom, and know that I didn't need their permission to belong. I already did. My phone buzzed, a message from the hotel manager. Finalize the community event, dates you requested. First foster care outreach dinner is January 14th. Your idea is already changing lives. I put the phone down, stepped back, and smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd healed. And healing, I'd learned, was the quietest and loudest kind of victory. So here's what I'll say to you. Yes, you, the one listening. If you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever been cut off, shut down, or made to feel like you didn't count, let them laugh, let them doubt, then build something they can't deny. And when they finally see you, stand tall, not for them, for you, because your worth was never up for debate. And sometimes the best revenge is never needing revenge at all.